It's a pleasure to welcome everyone here. I hope you had a great first day yesterday and a great day, or second day today so far. I am honored to welcome today's panel, Safe and Responsible Migration and Agenda for Europe. As we all know, migration is an extremely complicated and complex topic. Even so, the past few years, and it's been a topic that's more polarizing and politically charged over all the years, and it is a pleasure so far today to welcome this panel, Philip Narval, who is the director of this square. We're sitting in the square, and thank you so much. I'm giving over to you, Philip.
Francesca, thank you for giving this very important topic center stage. I was quite touched by the Nobel laureate from Ukraine speaking just right now, and I think many of you might have heard her saying and emphasizing that it's always about people, not numbers. So before we start to introduce the panel briefly and our discussion, I would like to invite you to turn to somebody you do not know yet and briefly reflect on the story of your own family, perhaps thinking about your father, mother, or grandparents. Has migration in any way affected your family? Have perhaps grandparents been forced to move or chosen to move to another country? And exchange a bit of your own biography. And then we'll start the panel. So you've got 2 minutes. Please turn to somebody you do not know. And if you sit next to somebody you know, perhaps you want to change seats. Just introduce yourself. And perhaps we can turn off our mics for a moment. Good. Okay.
In the mind of every individual.
Isn't it interesting to see what wealth of stories, experiences we have in the audience itself? And I would guess, but we can have a short show of hands. Who had some story of migration in their family dating back to the grandparents? Please raise your hands. So see, it's almost half of it, yeah? And I think when we talk about a very difficult issue and challenging issue for Europe, let's keep in mind it's always about people, whatever opinion you might have. And I'm very honored to welcome some amazing people, starting to my left, Janina Kugel. I don't need to introduce her much, but she's an accomplished business leader, now senior advisor with BCG and supervisory board member. It's so great to have you here. Please, a warm welcome and applause.
Thank you.
Martin Hecker was traveling a couple of years ago with Muhammad Yunus through Africa and suddenly realized there's more to life than working as a consultant, and he decided to dedicate his life to creating jobs in Africa. Martin, it's a great pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
An award-winning book author, social worker, activist from Sudan, and I have to stress that because you're the first speaker and participant after more than 50 years at the Sengal Symposium. Abdul, Aziz, Muhamat, it's a great pleasure to have you here as well. The question around safe and responsible migration, allow me just a personal story of my own. I come from a little farming community, so I really don't have migration history in the parents' or grandparents' side. It was already considered a big thing when my grandmother, who was Protestant, married a Catholic from the neighboring village, and a huge scandal, if you can imagine. But I do notice, I travel between Austria and Switzerland quite a lot, how young, mostly men, migrants coming in through Eastern Europe are trying to get their way to Germany. You kind of think, wow, what stories are there? Of course, that also causes conflicts, etc. Allow me also to give, before we start the discussion, a few personal thoughts. I think Europe is really failing. It's neither providing safe nor responsible migration, and I've been following the debate for many years. Starting from the year 2015, very little has changed. People are dying in the Mediterranean. Italy, Greece, other countries are overwhelmed. I don't know if we've really managed to create a culture of integration. Bright talents prefer to go to Canada, USA, Australia, but very little to Europe. The Dublin Accords, very flawed, puts a lot of weight on those countries. And we're seeing, I'm Austrian, I know what I'm talking about, huge political polarization on the back of people. We will not talk about integration. That would be another panel and another long discussion and challenge. Of course, it's intimately tied. We will try to make bridges between skilled migration and humanitarian migration and hopefully offer some solutions. We agreed that we'll talk only for now 20 minutes, again, to allow for your questions in the end. Those have been amazing, also by the young leaders. And let's start with you, Janina. You argued that a shortage of skilled labor in Germany was costing the German economy last year about 100 million euros. Now, how do you think, what role businesses should take in the future to change both the climate in Germany and Europe, but also policy? Because clearly we're not making much progress.
I think, what was important when we did that research is we wanted to make the differentiation that you already said. There is two types of migration. Let me make it simple like that. People that come for humanitarian reasons, refugees or others that actually want to flee from their countries. And then there is the topic of labor migration into a labor market for better business opportunities. And what no one had ever done before is giving a number of what is the economic value we could have if we had migration into respective countries. And the number that you gave, 100 billion, was only for Germany. But if we would look to that, of all of the countries that actually have a shortage of workers, skilled workers and not skilled workers, we would come up to that crazy number of 1 to 3 trillion US dollars. So what we're lacking is having a conversation that countries that politically, or as you said, like from a how should I say, catching voters, is saying is like we should actually stay isolated, need migration in order to actually keep the economic level that they have.
Yeah, but let me hark in here. businesses are good at lobbying at many things. Why are they failing in lobbying for that case?
Because I think the sheer number hasn't really been so clear for them, and the shortage. I mean, until like recently, like until a year ago, we always spoke about the shortage of skilled people. We never spoke about the shortage, for example, of shop assistants or people in hotels or in restaurants. And we see that, and we feel that, and I think every one of us can actually feel it now. So there is lobbying starting. But there is not yet the rules, and by the way, very frankly, to get people into a country, to get them a working permit, to get them, you know, like a place to live, is really an effort that only large companies can afford.
Yeah, and of course it differs from country to country how efficient that intake is. Some countries do it a little bit better in Europe, as far as I see.
Yes.
My own home country doesn't do that well.
It's also the question is like, is the country actually intending to do it?
Of course.
And most Europeans can't.
Martin, we had a little email thread, or at least one response from you coming when the issue of skilled migration, also from countries like Africa, came up, which is having great talents and also training great talents. I think some of you might have heard Patrick, who are founder of a university in Ghana, here with the symposium with us. But you immediately harked back, careful, we need those talents in those countries, and careful of brain drain. What is your worry in terms of, or is there an issue of attracting too much top talent that developing countries have paid to educate, that then spend their careers in Europe or elsewhere?
I mean, in principle, the brain drain issue is a concern we need to watch for. We have 20 million young people graduating from universities in Africa every year. Just for the field I'm representing, 11 million in digital services, software engineering, this kind of stuff. Nobody will believe that all 11 million every year would come to Europe now. So from that point of view, it is a balanced kind of equation we need to keep in mind. I personally believe people need to have options and opportunities. And if somebody wants to move to Europe to become a software engineer, to use that example, I'm all for it. On the same side, 90%, when I just talk to my people, want to stay in their country. They want to be with their families, they want to be with their friends, they want to have a decent job. This is primarily the reason why many look outside, because opportunities in many countries in Africa are not there. And this is what we try to change, at least a little bit, so that people can help to develop the civil societies and the countries in which they were born and raised. And so, I don't
perhaps
think
you
this
want to
is
just
either or.
explain. You run a social business that tries to connect digital staff, skilled labor with Europe. Perhaps you want to say in one sentence what your company does?
Yeah, we did two things. One is we founded Amalitech, or I founded Amalitech, Sub-Saharan Africa job creation in the field of software engineering, software testing, data analytics. And after training those people, they come with a university degree, but training the people, they work in our service centers in those countries, Ghana, Rwanda, for our clients in Europe. So they do this with a lot of passion. There has never been, and this is a call to the broader audience, never been an issue with lack of technical skills and so on and so forth. So I can wholeheartedly attest to the quality of what these people can do. And the second thing we did, we founded an association where like-minded companies are coming together. We have now 18 companies, large companies, who basically create jobs in Africa in the same field, strongly supported by GIZ and the Ministry of Germany for Economic Development.
Now, sticking for a moment to skilled labor migration, very often we hear Canada, Australia as role models in managing the sort of migration flows and attracting top talents. There is, however, a dark side to, in that case, Australia's migration policy. And Abdul, Aziz, if I may say, you were forced to discover that dark side as a 17-year-old when you were interned on an island in Papua New Guinea by the Australian government, and so outraged by the conditions they had turned into a civil activist to protest those. Is there, I know there are debates with Europe of creating centers, asylum centers outside Europe. Is there a way not to fall into that pitfall? And part of, and secondly, and perhaps you want to answer that question first, has anything changed in terms of Australia changing course, becoming more humane, or is this same detention facilities going on? And perhaps what did you experience there, if you want to start with that, because I think many people do not know of that side of the coin, of an often very positively seen migration policy.
Well, I mean, before I start with that, to answer the question, I just need to, connect the dots together. I think when we talk about migration, there are 4 things that we need to keep in mind. Number 1, we need to remember that migration, it's a topic, it's a very complex and multidimensional phase topic. It goes to human rights, from human rights it goes to business, and then from business it goes all the way to development. Then we have the issue of security will come. So they are all 4 together. You cannot separate one from the 4th. And I could say, resonate with what the previous speakers say, they're focusing more on the business, but this is the 1 out of the 4. And to come back to the question regarding my experience, I think as an individual, I have seen it from the human rights way. And it's like something that you've been forced to see it from the other side. We all have a picture of each country. When we talk about Canada, we talk about Australia, we talk about Swiss, we talk about any country. We have a picture. That's outside picture. But there's an internal picture that is really hard to discover. And sometimes this is where you see someone like myself or many others that have been forced to discover that internal picture. The external picture about the beauty of human rights and the country is a very well built, built by migrants, did by migrants, respecting of human rights. You go inside, actually you see a different picture where human rights, it's only become a word that you keep hearing, it's been repeatedly, but when it comes to an action, you don't get to see it. And in my experience, I think I went to Australia, as a 17 years old, have a mind of being someone else in Australia. And part of my mind that as a political activist in my country, I really wanted to join that activities and, make it as, as bigger as possible, and also to advocate from Australia toward what is happening in Sudan. But it turns out to be that my dreams, my hopes has been shifted from being political activist to a human rights activist. I've been introduced to human rights forcibly. And I accepted as a destiny, and I took it on from there. And in terms of the current situation in Australia, there's nothing has changed. Even though myself and many others, we fought so hard to change the entire system. One government left, other government took the responsibility, but it's still, when it comes to the situation, nothing has changed. When it comes to actually the replication of the Australian model in Europe, that is where my duty, I can see myself where I can advocate more. And I really try to advocate. And the advocate has to be from, I think, bottom up, not from top down. What I mean by top down, top down, if I today talk to the politicians, all I will, the answer that I will get, it's pretty much the narrative of a migration. We have a very negative narrative of migration that 1, they are coming to take a job, 2, they are, criminal, 3, and the list will go on and on. But if I want to use that approach from a bottom up, talk to students, talk to people in the schools, talk to someone like, the society, I would be able to connect the society, bring them together. What I will say, you have to actually, similar to what you did now, you ask everyone to just talk to your neighbor and see if you have actually anything that will connect you to immigration. And I believe that maybe you will find your cousin somewhere around here, 4th or 6th cousin. So, and this is the reality. This is the reality that from what I see.
Can I just ask you to explain in 2 sentences, because not everybody might be familiar. You're warning Europe from following the same path that Australia did. What is that detention model? You we're confronted with?
The detention that actually, the detention that actually I've been to and I've seen it, I think there is 100% a violation of human rights. That's the first thing. Number two, it also destroyed the entire reputation of a country. I think Australia back in the days, it used to be known as a country that built by migrant. But today, I think that picture is literally going to disappear. And this is really part of my side that I'm really scared that Europe will fall into that trap. Because Europe actually has this kind of like a legacy where we see the human rights institutions are all based here. And we could even see that from younger age, students are really learning about the human rights, protection of human rights. And I'm really part of my perception that I see that this is going to disappear if they follow the Australian model. Because the Australian model is a model that you could say it's based on inhumane model. And on top of that also, it treats humans not as, you never get to be treated as a humans, but you get treated as a number. And this is really the trap that I'm really trying to focus and spend most of my energy to avoid, Europe's, to follow, the Australian model.
Well, let's stick to that question for a moment, and let me throw in some expert opinion, not from me. I'm not an expert in migration, but Ruth Koopmans, who is a researcher and professor in the Wissenschaftszentrum Berlin, or the even more famous Oxford professor Paul Collier, who both argue that the only way for Europe, and this will be a question for all of you to answer or give a perspective on, is to stop illegal migration in the Mediterranean, and by stopping is to really not allow migrants to cross illegally into Europe, while at the same time to really open legal pathways for laborers and skilled as well as humanitarian, which means asylum, migration to Europe. Secondly, on the humanitarian migration, to make sure that refugees on grounds of persecution, human rights could apply for asylum outside Europe, which is not possible at the moment. To put it very simply, to replace current migration with a different type of migration. Now, there are very concrete policy recommendations these experts make, and many of them as well. And at the same time, we don't see much movement. And of course, a considerable part of European population is very worried, rightly or not, is very worried because they vote for right-wing parties. They campaign on that, is very worried about illegal migration into Europe. The 2015, as I mentioned earlier, was a watershed moment that brought to power a lot of those parties and is frequently cited as a moment where those fears were brought to a thing. Do you, and we'll start with you and then continue with Martin and Janina, do you see any use case in those recommendations by those experts to get out of it, so sort of really close the borders tightly to give safety to people who are worried, who otherwise vote for right-wing politicians, but at the same time really open up very clear channels for both asylum seekers who deserve humanitarian status as well as skilled migrants? They also propose to convince countries like Tunisia or Morocco to host these centers in a humanitarian way and in exchange get tickets for skilled labor migration, for example, to have young people to come to Europe legally and send money back. Remittances are, of course, a big issue in returning money to those countries. Abdul Aziz, let me start with you. You've heard those recommendations. What's the way out for Europe? What would you say? Would that make sense, or do you see another way?
I think, speaking from an advocate's perspective, like someone who's been on the ground, fighting this sort of scenario on day-to-day basis, I think I can agree in some area that it can be a realistic thing, but it needs really political will, and it needs a cooperation. And what I mean by political will, we need, first thing, that we need to get that narrative, that frame on migration, that narrative has to be changed. And to do so, actually, to change that narrative, we need actually to turn upside down the system. And what I mean by the system, we need actually to approach the country, the sender country actually. Because now we are always talking about from a place where the receiver country is talking about and seeing the problems, but we never actually get a chance to talk to the sending country. Why are these people coming? That's the first question you should ask yourself. Are they only coming to get a job? Are they coming to get a better life? Or are they coming to contribute to make, economical growth in the receiving country? And if we are not able to get an answer to that question, I don't think we will be able to, to close the border. And the other things that I see, opening a channels. Before even you open the channels, you need to actually stop the brain drain. We are seeing actually a brain drain. Brain drain is a part of the, I'm really kind of like allergic to the word illegal migrant, and I prefer to use it irregular migrant. So the brain drain is a part, it contributes actually to the acceleration of the illegal migrant. In what way? Today we have to, let's take a simple example. One doctor from a global south, how did the person, before actually he go to school, he gets supported by the states. He get paid by the tax money. He get really help until he stood on his feet. What happened? When that person actually, the idea when you train someone, you want him to fill in at that hospital, to work at the hospital, to provide health care for the people. But it turns out that that person will come here in Europe, and he work here in Europe. What happened? You create another vacancy back home there. And that vacancy, what it does?
And it won't be filled, the hospital
it won't be filled.
Suffer, and the person will perhaps be just a taxi driver.
Exactly. And then the person will end up becoming a taxi driver. And now we become seeing illegal migrants are coming. For me, my approach, I think that it's opening a legal way. We have to accept the fact that the legal way, yes, it will help. But the legal way has to be based on a limit. What I mean by limit, that you can allow someone who educates to come here and work, but for limited time, that the person will take the expertise to go back and
Martin,
help.
Is this something you would support with your experience of being somebody who mediates between Africa and Europe and is also critical of the brain drain issue? Or what are ways forward? Because in the end of the day, as much as we like to both the skilled migration and humanitarian migration cannot, as well as labor migration in whatever way, cannot be separated. What would be your policy recommendations if you had a wish list for European governments?
First, I'm always very skeptical if somebody says, here's a new white paper and this is a solution and now we fix it.
Because you're a consultant or why?
Exactly, for precisely that reason. And it's already been said, it's a super complex problem. By 2050, we need 400 million jobs in Africa to just get it to a level where it's probably acceptable. 400 million people will need a job. No migration policy, whatever we do, is going to address this in full and find a good solution to that. Now, I believe we can work with all these kind of ideas, and we have people who are applying for European universities. They want to do their kind of master's degree in whatever subject. They want to work with us a little bit, and then they want to go back to to the countries where we have our operations to then, with more skills, kind of develop the next generation. All these kind of ideas are great, and yes, we need to have them. But it's a bouquet of many things we need to do. And foremost, we need to build the jobs in these countries. We have now roughly a number which says for 1 million jobs, we need roughly 5 billion to get them to international standards.
So just because it's always the question what you do next. Are you available to make connections if people want to invest in Africa after at Apero? Yeah?
Absolutely.
Great. Okay.
So,
Janina, before we go to questions, you heard some of the policy recommendations that Ruud Koopmans was just brought out a new book. It's creating public debate. How realistic is that we find a way out? And also responding to the recommendation, temporary visas, migration policy alone won't solve it. We need to invest in Africa. What is your take?
So as Abdul said, it is a complex matter, and there is at least 4 factors playing into that. So I wouldn't say it's like we need either or, but we need and. We need different solutions for different types of what is actually happening. I also believe it, maybe it's naive to believe, but if you think of it like how much money a family actually needs to invest in trying someone from the family to cross the Mediterranean, stay safe, and be here, it's at least $10,000, okay? If that same family would know that by investing $10,000 in an education, in certain skills, in a language skill, this would be a guarantee to come in a legal, planned, safe way to get a job, I believe there would be a lot of families doing exactly that. And there would be a next generation coming up which would actually profit from that. So I believe there is a good way, but that actually requires, and I confirm what Abdul said, that countries need to actually build bridges and build networks with the countries. And that is an interesting thing that we researched. Migration always happens on a network basis. A lot of countries actually only go to a neighboring country, same religion, same culture, and especially where they know someone already. And I'm trying to always tell the story about, like, think about the United States. If you look at some of the countries, like looking at the past is sometimes easier, right? Because it's not terrifying and no one actually has to worry. You would see countries or cities along the coast where everyone would tell you, I'm Irish. You know, like Americans say, like, I'm Irish, like 4th generation, whatever. But where you could actually see there was an Irish, the British, the Italian population actually arriving. And the same happens, and the same is something very unique today. And rightly so. If you would go in a foreign country, where would you go? Where maybe you have someone from your family or someone that you know already. So building these bridges, and this is exactly what sometimes countries do. Portugal has just been doing that with India, like doing a dual way of like, this is what we need, this is what we could actually employ. India needs to create 1 million jobs every month just to employ those people that actually come into the labor market. And this is what Europe is not doing on a strategic level. It's not helpful, even though it's a good approach, to have like 50 nurses or male nurses being educated in Colombia and then coming to Germany or to Switzerland. It needs to be in a large number of things. And I believe that if we establish that, if we would overcome also the prejudices, and that is, I think, is really a big critique to a lot of Europeans. Europeans still believe that their education is better. They still believe that they know things better, and they still believe what we can do here cannot be done somewhere else. And Martin was just like explaining that. So it's also a part of an arrogance. So that, I think, would definitely be worthwhile to look at creating networks, creating platforms, and last thing to that, it's not going to happen overnight. It's taking quite a few years in order to establish those relationships that are a trustful relationship and where people also know this is what I can plan according to. One last sentence on the brain drain. We also worked on exactly that part. Is it true or isn't it true? And we, of course, could only work with the data from the past. What we actually figured out, and then the World Economic Forum was nicely so just like publishing that, I think like 10 days ago, is that the brain drain actually doesn't happen that much because the migrants actually pay back to their countries. They eventually return. They share their ideas. Not only that they share their experiences and ideas with the countries that they come to, but it also creates pretty much like the centricity of like bringing a lot of people together, which is then fostering innovation in both countries. So it's not only like sending money home and giving another opportunity for some of the family members to get an education which maybe they wouldn't, but it's also of like bringing their ideas back to create businesses back there. And the numbers of founders and entrepreneurs in Europe as well as in the United States are overproportionally migrants that actually fund their own business and not so much the natives, that have already been living in the same country for a generation.
Well, thank you. We could go on, and it's a complex problem. Thank you, Janina. But we also have a knowledgeable audience here, and I would like you to come up with questions or statements. As long as it's short and succinct, all is welcome. And to make sure we get a fair distribution, I will invite always one man and then one woman to ask a question. So then we don't have an issue of just men asking questions.
And of course you're starting with a woman, right?
Of course, indeed we are. So please, here we go. Who wants to ask the first question, please?
I was just kidding, right? So
No.
the icebreaker is gender-free.
Yeah. I see you're breaking. Okay, let's make the icebreaker the gentleman here. And if you introduce yourself, perhaps name and why you're here, and then start with your question, please. And if you have it directed to somebody specifically, and to make it a bit easier, I would suggest that we collect 3 questions always, right? And then we answer either it's to all of you, or then we can collect a bit. Please.
Hi, my name is Harsh and I'm from India. So my question is, how do you safeguard the rights or the resources of the native population while also accommodating migrant population? Because there is a possibility that some portion of your native population is also impoverished or is not as well off as the other ones. And while you will have to dedicate some resources to the migrants who are coming in, so there can be a backlash between, the native population will be like, give us the resources rather than allocating it to migrants. So how do you deal with that kind of situation?
Thank you. And now, according to our invitation from a female participant, please. Thank you. The lady in the back.
Hi, I'll stand up. Hi, everyone. My name is Emma. I'm from Canada. And I was wondering, I'm going to talk about the Canadian context because that's what I'm familiar with. But I think it's applicable to European nations as well. We have a really big need for migration in Canada. We are not making enough of ourselves to sustain our population. And so there's obviously like a massive amount of benefits, and yeah, a super reciprocal relationship. But I was wondering what the panelists' thoughts are on the cognitive dissonance between understanding and like the statistics that have been talked about the positives that immigration has on a society. Those hard facts exist and are out there, and I was wondering if any of you have put thought into or have ideas about what the cognitive dissonance is of people in those countries for why there's still really strong immediate responses, that it's like immediately a negative thing, and if anyone has thought about those narratives or, yeah, that sort of thing.
Thank you. And then perhaps, yeah, I don't know, I will trust the gentleman passing the mic to.
Thank you. So I'm Tanmay. I'm a PhD student here at the ETH, and I'm a part of the academic jury for judging the essays at the symposium. I know Philippe mentioned that this is not a panel on integration, but I'm going to ask this anyway. So European countries seem to emphasize assimilation as opposed to integration, which is the norm in Anglo countries. The French, for example, famously don't like hyphenated identities. So you can be an Indian American. I could be an Indian American, for example, but being French Indian or Swiss Indian is unheard of. Do you think this is part of why English-speaking countries are more attractive to immigrants? And what do you think is preferable, integration or assimilation? Thanks. And this is to everyone.
Okay, and to be fair, let's do one more question from a female participant, and then it's 2-2. I think there was a lady in the front, please. You were there before. First row had her hand up already at the first instance. And again, if you... Yeah.
Thank you. My question is to Mr. Muhamat. You were talking about limited migration, and isn't then the individual migrant paying, if he or she can only stay a limited amount of time, paying the price for the home government not making opportunities for them to actually want to stay there? So they want to have a better life, so they migrate somewhere else, and then they have to go back. Isn't the one person then paying the price for governments not working?
Let's start with you straight away, Abdul, and then if you want to kick Martin and Janina go to the other questions as well, or pick up any.
I think in terms of, should I start with a random question or?
Well, perhaps you want to start with the one directed to you personally, and then.
In terms of like one person pay price, I don't think actually one individual can pay a price, because when I talk about a limited number, it's not about the limited number of how many people will get here, but it's all about the limited time that the individual will stay here. That's what I'm referring to. Because, we have seen that some migrations, some of the migrants workers who comes here actually to work and go back, but it turns out from being a temporary staying and work to a permanent stay in work. So we see that actually there is a lack of their expertise that needed back home, which is not exist. So they are here. They are staying here for long term. And what actually part of the proposal that I was recently we did also within the NGO that now I work with, we've been talking about it, is to propose an options. Options like there will be a limited time. Maybe European can introduce something called like a limited time temporary protections for the migrant to work here, maybe 2 years, 3 years, and when their visa actually expire, they need to go back and open other opportunities for others to come here. So their expertise, they're taking their own expertise and the European expertise back home there to create some other businesses or even to invest it in the hospital or to create even more opportunities for others to join. Because this is a kind of like encouraging minority and to encouraging minority and to help the majority to join.
Do you want to comment on, and just for you guys also, Martin and Janina, we have also the issue of safeguarding local populations who feel threatened, especially if they're on the lower income scale, and that is very clear the way they vote from the gentleman in the beginning. And then there was the question on cognitive dissonance. We have data on how beneficial migration is, but immediate reaction in Europe is negative. So
maybe I take the first question.
Yeah.
Data doesn't prove that this is right. I think that's a narrative, and that's also populism that is actually always happening. Now, of course, it would be a question like, which country are you referring to? But if we take those European countries that actually have social welfare and whatever, for them it's actually not right. It even proves that after 5 to 10 years, having more migrants in the jobs actually increases the salary of the non-migrants, so of the natives. Yeah. So you would actually say is like. And that does not automatically mean that is like, that it's cheap labor of migrants coming in and that they are underpaid and not paid to that. I mean, we also know that this is existing, but it actually sees that the entire market is improving. What I think the very important part of it is it does not happen overnight. You need 5 years. And maybe that's a little bit the reference to the question of like Anglo, what do you say, American, Indian American, or from Indian French, that we see that the US and Canada are the countries where labor migrants, and let me make the differentiation, after 5 years actually have the same income and tax level than natives, and after 10 years, refugees, so people that actually came because they were fleeing their home countries, are on the same level than locals as well. And beyond that, they even pay more in taxes in the US than Native Americans would have done. Native Americans in terms of like those that were actually born there. So I think it's more the narrative that creates a lot of fear, right? And that actually creates that, okay, we don't want anyone in our country, which is really describing that rather than the data that you actually see.
do you want to say something on the narrative issue? Because of course, or
that's why I was like so strongly advocating that where Abdul said the complexity of migration is bigger, that I want to change somehow the thinking of that it's like a good thing or a humanitarian thing that we do, but that the world also needs it. Both the receiving as well as the parting countries actually also need that interaction. And you know, it's maybe drastic to say that, but you know, also to your very first question, when is it that business executives listen? They listen if they hear something about profit, if they hear something about numbers, if they hear that they are better off if they do something. You see the same with ESG, you see the same thing, or you're seeing the same thing with diversity. And this is why we were so eager to actually make a tag, a number, a price tag, a financial tag to it, in order to also see it from a different perspective.
Okay. From your side.
And just, I fully agree with you, and just to build on that, it has to do with familiarity. Those people who have the least exposure to people from other countries are the most concerned about their own well-being and so on and so forth. Those who have intensive interactions usually don't have that at all. And most notable, you see this at international universities where young people like you guys are coming together and pretty much work and live together. So how do we change that? And how do we get people closer? Because I wholeheartedly believe politicians are at the end of the day driven by what the people, the population, drive them towards. Yes, we have different opinions, we have all this, but when it comes to, at the end of the day, to voting and so on and so forth, all this kind of very complex and by all means not satisfactory kind of rules and regulations we have in our borders is a result of politicians are not prepared and probably will never be to just move forward and say, this is now how we're going to do it. Because the people who are not familiar with what will come to them and how they have to deal with it will basically avoid that from making it happen. Now, if that's the case, I think, and I go back to my beginning, the private sector, the businesses, are the lever to change this. Because all these people have jobs, they work most of the daytime, then with colleagues in the future who are from different places, being it remotely, which already changes dramatically the perception, or on site. For me, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. But we need to.
If I may interrupt you there, because I would like to give another round for questions. I think we can.
Can I also comment on the assimilation versus integration part?
Sure. Yeah.
Personally, and Abdul, maybe you have a different opinion there, right? I think you need to have both. In every group of people that come with a very different background, right? You need to actually make it also happen that the group gets a certain understanding without that anyone actually needs to lose their experience and all of that. But what is not very helpful, if you require everyone coming in with different experiences and bright ideas to assimilate and become just like the others, but you only can flourish and you only get the innovation out of it if there is an integration happening and all of that. And to your point, I think the Anglo-Saxon countries are a little bit better off because the first language that people learn, other than their mother tongue, is English. And of course, it's not very helpful if countries like Germany, and I may say so as I am German, require a level of German fluent, right, using grammar that an ordinary German is never using, in their day-to-day operations. Like those of you that speak German, the Plusquamperfekt, whoever is actually applying that in the normal way.
And we could try that with the audience.
This is something that actually we also have to improve, and I always like say when we speak English every day, no matter where we come from.
And Janina, I hope you don't mind that personal question. Have things also improved for you personally? Because I often notice how embarrassed I am when I hear people saying, talking to somebody who's visibly has a sort of some different ethnicity, and they're like, so where are you really from?
No, they still ask me.
Is that still happening?
Yeah.
Okay, so
they still do.
If I
never answer.
Yeah.
Because I'm trying, a black friend of mine who always says, Janina is always trying to educate people. I never tell them anything. I just saying, what do you mean? Stuttgart, do you want to know the suburb, or do you want to know the street and all of that? I exactly know because I'm trying to say people are people, no matter.
Last comment, very brief, because
just very brief. If I may ask, reply to your question regarding the assimilation. It has something to do with the colonization as well, because let's say people actually go. Those who actually been colonized by the Great Britain. Let's say the UK. They always prefer to go to the English-speaking country because why? You learn there's some similarity in your country actually, even though the colonization actually took place many years ago, but the similarity stays. Even in some of the school curriculum that you learn something about them. So you always be pleased to go to where they are. And some of the French colonial, they always ended up coming to the French colonial country. So if you are actually from English speaking, you ended up in a French colonial country, first thing you think about it is about the language. And I completely agree with you. That's one of the things that, if you ask actually 100 migrants, the only one will say the language is not an issue. But of course, I don't agree with that. Language is a big issue. So you want to save some time for yourself to get right away in the business market. And instead of actually waiting 5-6 years, learn how to speak German, then you go to the market. So which one you prefer?
German.
Agreed.
Well, let's go for. I think we can do 2 more or 3 more questions. Who is up next? Please, I need the mic because I can't. Well, let's start with the lady in the red dress, please. Can you do the mic? Thank you. Yeah. Or.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Katrina. I'm from Switzerland. I work in consulting and restructuring more specifically. I'm going to draw a parallel, and the final question I want to come to is, what is the role or responsibility of the media? I mentioned I work in restructuring. We do unpopular work. We cut costs, and mostly that implies people being laid off, or often. And that's an unpopular decision, even though factually it's necessary. The parallel that I see is migration, as some of you mentioned, seems unpopular, or the negative aspects seem to outrank the positive ones in the perception of people. But the numbers, as you, Janina, said, tell a different story. So factually, you're doing the right thing, allowing migration or supporting it. But then from a feeling perspective, that isn't supported. When we do that in a company, first of all, there's a lot of communication, and then there's the factual necessity to go through with it. With migration, I'm wondering, where is that communication part coming in? So we mentioned politicians, but if you look at Germany, for example, and the Bild Zeitung specifically, the media has a huge role in that to play in that feeling, and are they ever made responsible for the picture that they're depicting? So where do you...
If I may interrupt you there, we
Sorry.
need, but the media issue we'll keep.
Yeah.
So one more question, perhaps the gentleman in the
Thanks.
front row, and then we'll do a final wrap up, please.
Hello, I'm Khalil Radi. I'm from Switzerland, and I'm from the organization Buy for Your Plastic. I have a personal question to you, Janina. I truly respect when you say I'm not going to answer where I'm truly from, but I would like to ask you or understand what your thoughts behind that are, because I'm from Zurich and they ask me the same question, and I like to answer. My dad is from Morocco, and I explained him why he immigrated to Switzerland, and I use it as a chance to raise awareness about immigrants and to spread positivity, to understand that also my Swiss colleagues understand a little bit better how these things can happen.
Thank you. Let's perhaps start with your question personally to and then do the media.
You know, I'm just referring to, because I think there's a lot of things that we say that I think is a discrimination. If I was blonde and blue-eyed, no one would ask me why I speak proper German. And that is just like the one thing that it's not about, I mean, and random people that don't know me, everyone who's my friend knows everything about me or my family or whatever, you know. But I think it's uneducated to the biggest extent. They say, oh, hello, Janina, cool, blah, 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 blah. Third sentence, where do you come from? I mean, hell, where are we? And so I'm just like trying, I understand you, and I respect the personal decision, but I want to tell people, is like, do you actually notice that you're treating me totally different? It's a bias. I know exactly that people don't intend to, but I'm educating them. So if you would ask me where my friends come from or people that I met, that maybe are, you know, whatever have, I would never ask someone unless someone tells me the story, because I would always respect, this is a very personal question, and if I want to answer that, I do, but I would never ask. That's my take, right?
Role of the media, holding them to account, narratives, anyone from you?
Well,
yeah?
I will try it. When it comes to the role of the media, I think maybe in this panel, I think I will be one of the people who actually had engaged with the media, I think more than even 1 million times. But the problem is with the media today, in our generation, let's say, the media is not really built to send actually the right message. And I'm not going to say all the media, but there are some of the media are not built to send the right message. We had actually two groups of media. One media, the minority, are really trying their best to send the right message. And there's other media, the majority are trying to sell it. It's all about selling. It's all about how many people I'm going to get into what, to follow me or to watch my channel or even to believe what I say. So we are consuming, something that completely has nothing to do with the individual, with the migrant, but without even questioning, because we are too lazy to spend some time to question the source of the information. And also we are too lazy to question that what is the interest of that journalist or the individual or the media by framing a migrant, as like a black ghost over there. Don't get close. If you get close, it will just destroy you. So this is really one of the things and I think for the leader of tomorrow, I think there's something that we need to take it into consideration, and we need to spend some time to analyze it. We need to actually walk away from the conservative media that actually control to create a media that actually send a truth message about migration. And I can completely say what before mentioned about the numbers. We need to show some figures. Today, what people believe. If I talk about migration, let me show some figures. We talk about the contribution, the developments, and all of that. Let's show how many migrants actually contributed into the development of one state. How many migrants actually contributed into the growth of the economy. So this is something that we should add to.
You're already sort of giving me the cue for our final statements, and I'd like you to be very brief because, and Martin, you can, if you want to add on, we're talking about also changing a narrative, right? And putting, we're in a cesspit of negativity, and we could talk about the challenges out there in politics and right-wing politics, but I think you yourself here on the panel have broad examples, positive examples of your own work, activism, research, business work. Can you perhaps add one more sentence or two sentences for the audience to take away who is doing it well, where are solutions that we should look at and focus and can support? I mean, there are a lot of people here also thinking about career choices. Perhaps they want to make a contribution. And perhaps, Martin, as you were, didn't talk in the last round, perhaps you want to start with a final statement. Can you give us, aside from or perhaps even you want to re-emphasize your focus on business investment?
Regarding media, we have free speech, and I don't think we can control the media, or no, we should control the media. We can try to basically change the narrative, but to change the narrative, we need to have the stories to do that. And building the stories of success, successful migration, successful integration, successful collaboration is what is the first thing to do to basically have something to put against this kind of fear. Second, to researchers, things like ChatGPT and others platforms will roughly generate up to 50% of the global internet content artificially over the next decade, just by producing automatically content. And what they will use is not a group of experts who are sitting somewhere feeding it, but what's already there, the narratives and stories from all of us. And so I think it's an illusion to believe that trying to influence a few newspapers and TV channels will make all the difference. Most of, in particular, the young people are anyways using different channels to inform themselves, for good or bad. So when I take all this, I stay with my narrative, which is expose the people to this experience in wherever we can. Give them the stories they can talk about within their kind of circles. I got to know somebody from Sudan, I got to know somebody from Ghana, from wherever in Africa, and India, and so on and so forth. And what a pleasant experience it was to exchange ideas, to work together, or to just be together.
Thank you, Martin. If I may cut you short there, because as an Austrian, I like to go over time, but I would like to leave. We're in Switzerland, so otherwise I get into trouble.
You have to.
Janina, one last or two sentences, really very short, because there is a fantastic final panel.
I would like companies and countries to actually think strategically about migration and do structural changes to do it differently than they did before.
Thank you very much. Abdul, your two sentences.
Well, 2 words. One, business should invest in a public education. That's one most important thing. And second of all, let's all actually engage, in a sense of advocacy where we can learn about the reality without just sitting in our, chair somewhere else, checking TikToks or whatever people say, and then we take it. We need to actually learn by ourselves from the reliable source.
Thank you very much. I think that's a worthy final statement. thank you so much for starting this conversation, because I think this should be a beginning. If we can recommend something for the next year's St. Gallen Symposium, perhaps we can welcome you back if the organizers decide, or open more room for that very important topic. And now I have to say, one of my favorite moments is coming up. It's the final closing ceremony of the St. Gallen Symposium. You should all attend, because it's an amazing lineup and great atmosphere. And then, of course, a gathering afterwards in the main building. Thank you so much. Please enjoy the rest of the symposium. Thanks, and once again, a big applause to our fantastic speakers and podium.
Thank you.